Hi everybody, Alan Cafferkey here. Today I want to talk to you about Google's NotebookLM, the LM there standing for language model. So this is being billed as a research assistant tool, and I think it kind of lives up to that, so I wanted to show it to you. It is distinct from the other generative AI tools out there, specifically like Google's other mainstay there, Gemini or ChatGPT or Anthropic's Claude, in that instead of looking at the whole wide web for its answers or for its from a gigantic database, it's going to only look at the sources that you specify. So this is what they're calling a more grounded approach. So the idea is that you can rely on it a bit more because you are telling it like what the reliable sources are, and also because it you are specifying the sources and it is a much more reduced amount of sources, you are in effect reducing the possibility of hallucinations or inaccuracies. You are not taking those out of hand altogether, though. They are still very possible, and you're going to see the warning that Google keeps front and center, or at least bottom and center, of NotebookLM itself. But it's come a long way since its first debuted. Actually, it made the news a couple of months ago because one of the big features, and I'll show you what it is the podcast generator that it does from the material. But this past December, it actually improved even further, and I think it's really worth taking a peek at now. Now, a lot of students have already been using this, so you may have heard about it already. But I think from the student usage, and I think for the possibilities it can be for your own research, again, like Google is selling this as a research assistant, I think it's a really neat tool to look at. So to access NotebookLM, you go to notebooklm.google.com. You can log in with your Fordham credentials if you're at Fordham. If not, just log in with your regular Google username and password. And you'll come to this Welcome to NotebookLM screen. Now, what I'm going to show you today is a notebook that I've already built out, so you can see what one looks like that's fully fleshed out, hopefully. And then I'll show you how to build one from scratch when we go to Create New. So, jumping into the notebook, the way that Google has set it up is the left-hand side are all the sources. So it can take up to 50 sources. I have 48 in here, just giving myself a little bit of room to add a couple more later. And it's pretty neat. So each source you put in here, it will give you a summary. So I have the summary of the document, I have the keywords, and I have the full text. Now, what's true for this tool and other tools in terms of accessibility and readability is always true. So, and that is the old IT adage of GIGO, G-I-G-O, garbage in, garbage out. So if you are putting an old PDF in here that is just a scan of a photocopy, it's not going to be very good. What I'd recommend to you is try to find like the latest version that you can find of any PDF, whether it be from the publisher, whether it be from libraries. But if you're relying on old PDFs, I'd really encourage you to make sure you've run that through Adobe Acrobat or Abby Fine Reader, or basically something that is going to redo the OCR, make sure the OCR is accurate. Because when you upload the PDF, this was originally a PDF, but it is changed it to text. Now you'll see the formatting is kind of off because it's taking every line by line, but it's still very legible. Now I've included another document here. Here is one. And you'll notice that there are these kind of typos throughout. So instead of William, I get \x/4LL1AM. Mostly fine. It looked fine when I ran it through the screen reader for like the OCR before, and it still didn't come out great. Ooh, there's another bad one. So your this will only be as reliable as your sources are, and it doesn't just limit yourself in terms of thinking about this in terms of like how good are the particular authors and articles that I'm putting in here. It's in terms of like how good is the actual copy that I have. Something to think about. Now, I found when I was putting this together, the majority of my time, if I were to kind of subdivide it, was on collecting my resources and make sure that they had decent titles, like the naming convention and putting all that together. So I wanted to have the date as much as possible, the author, the title of the article, uh, putting that together, assembling all those things, and then finding the right PDFs wasn't like a quick thing. But I think that when you put that kind of work in, just like anything, you'll get a better result. Now, that's the sources window. You can, I think, shrink it if you want to have more room over here for the other two things. Now, the other two windows is where the action occurs. So the way that Google was kind of describing it is kind of like you have sources, so that's like the backbone of this, and then you have chat, which is how you interact with this, and then you have the studio where you're creating new things. Now, the chat should be very similar to what you've seen before. Let's see, can I configure this? I can make this, I can play with the style a little bit. Let's see. I'll leave it as the default length. And I like guide. We'll do that. Maybe analyst. We'll just do default for now. You can play around with these. That's the kind of fun thing. So you can start throwing questions at this thing. The more resources you have, and the more resources that they are related, I find that when there's a similar topic, that's the whole point of this, and you get better answers. So I'll just throw a simple question in it, and what is Jesuit pedagogy? I'm a slow typist. Now, it's not as fast as like your Geminis or your Claude or ChatGPT. So you'll see that. But then the answer kind of pops up. Now, this is interesting because you'll notice it is a little bit like Perplexity in terms of it tells you exactly where it's getting the sources from. So like I can click on these things and it'll tell me like where in the sources it's pulling it from. Now again, that makes me feel a little bit better about it in terms of like, all right, it's telling me where it got it from. However, keep in mind there's always that NotebookLM may be inaccurate. Please double check its responses. And I can go straight to the source there. That's pretty neat. Now, interacting with the chat can go beyond like you asking it questions. You can kind of like get a bit more into the details, but also like any other AI chat feature, like if it's not giving you the answer the way you wanted to give it, you can tell it. You can also kind of like push it a little bit if it's not giving you like what you're looking for at all. So, for example, the other day I was asking it to, can you give me some questions back? I'd like you to question me, and it was saying it couldn't do it. Then I would come back again, close out the window, and start over again. I would basically just do refresh, like restarting the context window, and it would do it. So don't be afraid to push it. So, for example, can you give me some good questions on Jesuit pedagogy that I should consider? Again, a little bit slow in comparison to the other tools out there. But that's, again, because it's looking through all the 48 sources that I have here. Well, that's not bad. Well, that's interesting. Sustainability keeps coming up as a topic as of late. How does the university's curriculum, including the core curriculum and academic majors, mirror its aspirations for sustainability and the environment? What dedicated courses and programs introduce students to the complexities and the challenges of environmental justice? That's interesting. So, it's a chat feature. Again, it's only going to be as good as the quality and volume and legibility of the material that you put into the sources. That's kind of fun. You can also tell it, hey, that was a good response, or hey, that was a bad response. And you can copy it. Now, one thing that's very helpful is if you got an answer that you think might be beneficial down the line for your students, you can just save it to Note and it will pop over here. Now, what I did before is I came up with a slew of questions that I thought might be beneficial to get a conversation rolling on Jesuit pedagogy, and boom, I just saved each of them. So anybody can come here and get a sense. Now, the thing to keep in mind, though, is when you do this, let's take a peek at one of these notes. You'll notice it still has those references, but they're no longer linked. So like it is just a copy of the text. So like that is a shortcoming currently. Now, I guess transitioning over to the studio section, let's work our way around. I'll go for the simplest things first. So like going straight from chat to the notes section, you'll notice I copied like a lot of these questions and answers over here. That's pretty straightforward. I can create a new note from scratch, and I just made a nice little welcome, like, hey, how are you? This is how you contact me. But it does have a couple of fun default ones. So you can you can have it create its version of a study guide for you or for your students from this material. So I can just click study guide. I'm going to click FAQ too. We'll get them both going at the same time. Boop. All right. Let's take a peek at the FAQ first. What is the primary aim of the Society of Jesus, and how does it connect to Jesuit higher education? How is poverty viewed within the Society of Jesus, particularly regarding its members and educational institutions? That's interesting. What is the significance of the general exam? It's kind of important these days in the context of Jesuit education and spiritual reformation. So, are these the best questions? Are these the most appropriate questions? Maybe, maybe not. But it's an interesting like first shot at it looking at all those 48 sources and coming up with some possible questions. Then the study guide that we created. Let's see, what does that say? Oh, interesting. It gives you a quiz and a set of answers. Essay questions. So basically, it's generated a test for whoever wants to go through this. That's pretty neat. So again, fun options. Now, these things up here, the audio overview and the interactive mode, are the real distinguishing features of this tool. Like this is where this kind of made the news a couple of months ago. The podcast, so it's generating a podcast from all the material. Now, as the owner of the notebook, I can give it a prompt and say, I want you to talk about this. So, for example, for this particular one, the prompt I gave it, very simple, was that I want you to talk about Jesuit pedagogy, specifically for a higher ed audience of instructors who may or may not be teaching at a Jesuit school for the first time, kind of like an introduction. I also specifically wanted them to talk about the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm of Jesuit education, because I feel like that's a specific thing in Jesuit education that distinguishes it, but doesn't often get talked about as much as your general terms like cura personalis or magis. So put that. That's all I said to it, and
Welcome to this deep dive into Jesuit education. We're really going to get into like what makes this approach to teaching and learning so unique.
It's a fascinating approach. And, for someone like you who's considering teaching in this environment.
Yeah, exactly. We also know that you're particularly curious about the Ignatian pedagogical paradigm,
Which we'll definitely get into, like what that is and how it works.
Yeah, and how it works in practice. Mm-hmm. Like, just to kick things off, one thing I keep seeing over and over in these sources is...
So you'll notice that it's very conversational. It's a back and forth between like two talking head type podcasters. The main guy there sounds suspiciously like a mix of Michael Rosenbaum and Dax Shepard, who are two very popular podcast hosts. But it's fun. Now, it can only hold one podcast at a time. So when I click load there, that's the last one that I created. And when you click load there, you're only going to get that one because you are the viewer, you are not the owner. That said, I do have the option to download the podcast. Comes as a WAV file for those of you who are paying attention to such things. You can then upload that WAV file to Google Drive or OneDrive or whatever online storage that you have available to you, and then put a link to that down here. And then you can just create more podcasts. So if you wanted to, let's say you have an 8-week course and you wanted a podcast on the topic for each week, you could do that and just have like 8 podcasts all together, and then maybe have an intro, podcast or however. But there's a lot of fun options now. They vary in length. I've seen some as short as like 8 minutes, 7 minutes. I've seen some go to a half hour, but it goes as long as it thinks it needs to, depending on what your prompt is. Now, I think the more detailed your prompt, probably the longer it's going to go, but we'll see. Now, as of December 2024, they introduced this interactive mode, which is exciting. So basically, when we hop into this interactive mode, you'll notice the little green line here. What's going to happen is that podcast that was there before is still going to be there. I can hit play and it's going to start. But then at any point in that conversation, I can join it and throw out a question or a comment and affect the podcast, and they will start going back and forth. Now, if you hit join and you don't really say anything, it'll just steamroll ahead. But if you pop in there, it will interact with you. Let's play.
Welcome to this deep dive into Jesuit education. We're really going to get into like what makes this approach to teaching and learning.
Again, it's the exact same podcast I had before.
Learning so unique.
It's a fascinating approach, and for someone like you who's considering. Oh, hey, welcome. What's up?
Hi, could you explain the importance, or at least the role, of reflection in the Jesuit pedagogy approach?
Oh, hi there. Well, that's a great question.
Yeah, that's actually a really central point to what makes Jesuit education, Jesuit.
It's mentioned in like this document from the International Commission on the Apostolate of Jesuit Education. Mm-hmm. It's ICAJ from 1993. And this whole idea of reflection, it's kind of baked into the mission of Jesuit education.
Absolutely. And it's not just about absorbing information.
Right. It's about thinking about what you're learning.
Yeah, and why it matters. The ICAJ document calls it a thoughtful reconsideration.
Okay, let's unpack this. So what does this all mean?
It means that Jesuit education isn't just about, developing really smart people.
Yeah.
It's about forming individuals who are driven by conscience, by compassion, and a desire to use what they know to serve others.
It's about, like...
So that's wild. That's so much fun. Now, you can play with that to your heart's content. I think you can also, download that audio overview. I don't know if I want to, but there's an option there. So... That's a really exciting, that's a really interesting thing to play with. So there you go. That's the main. Those are the two. I'd say the two main like distinguishing features. But even with that, it's still an interesting tool. Like to have an LM looking specifically at the sources that you have picked out. And I should have mentioned this before. You can deselect a source if without having to delete it, just by unchecking it, or vice versa. You can unselect all and just ask questions of one, two, three, whatever amount of sources you want. So that is it in a nutshell. Now, it's shared just like any other Google document or Google form, so you can uh, put it to one person, a couple of people, or however. And you have analytics now. People have to start using it for you to get a sense of analytics. So I haven't had too much experience there, but should be interesting. Now, let's say we want to create one from scratch. Let's jump back to the main page. We're going to create new, and that's it. You're just uploading sources. So, like I was saying before, the you choosing your sources. So like what I would do is like I would just make a folder and just start cobbling together everything that I want. I would then make sure that the naming convention is the same across all of them so that when someone's looking at that list of sources, it makes some sort of sense. So, I had author, date, and title. You do what you want. You can put in Google Docs, you can put in websites, you can put in YouTube videos. Now, when you put a YouTube video in, all it really is doing is getting that transcript. So, as good as a transcript is as good as it's going to be. Uh, it really only takes, in terms of text, PDF files, text files, and Markdown. It will hiccup on doc files or Excel files, so you'd want to transition those over to either a Google Doc or a PDF. I don't know if that's like by design or just that's they haven't figured out how to do it yet. You can also just copy and paste text in. And then once you've got that, you can go to town. Your chat will reference the sources that you have over here. You can continue to add sources after you build. So like I have 48 sources in mind. I can continue to add, and it just is like an additional thing. Again, you only have up to 50 sources. That might change in later iterations of this, but I think 50 is probably a good number. Mm, once the sources are in, you can then start generating everything all in the studio here, so that you can generate the conversation. It'll do a default conversation right off the bat for you, or you can click customize and you can give it a prompt like I did. And then, like I said, you can download it, save it, upload it somewhere else, and just put a link down into the notes section, and you can go from there. Uh, yeah, in terms of use cases, I see this being really handy for the humanities. I think that, a history class. I think a sociology class. I think anything with a large amount of information um, is a good resource. It can be for anything. I'm curious how well it would do in like in a math class and in the sciences, but I think it works best when there is like a narrative arc to the material, so that it can kind of like work within that arc. Um, so for something kind of broad, I might create multiple notebooks. So I might have like one notebook every week for a certain set of material. And when I do that, what I can do is I can actually repeat the sources. So for example, let's take chemistry. Let's take for just as a random one. If I wanted to have a notebook for each week, like if the topic varies, I could just have the link to the primary text. So like let's say there's an online textbook, there's an online like guide that is applicable to every part of the material throughout the semester. I can keep repeating that source and just like have it in each notebook, but then I can have different sources on the specific material in each week in each notebook, and then we'll just reference that. So that's one way to do it. I've seen this used varieties, and then I know people just use it for their own personal use, and as like I said, I've heard from many students who just use this and just upload material and put it in there. Now, speaking of uploading material, you might have a question on the security of this. So this is like your own Google Drive, and if you, especially if you're in that forward environment, you have your own the protections like that are afforded by the contract that the university has. But it's not becoming part of the large language models, like what you put in here, the document. So like it really is just your own little folder, and like you're this LM, your LM of this notebook is looking at the sources that you put in there. So there is that little bit of extra security that I know is a concern when we put documents or anything into the ether, so to speak. We're playing with like ChatGPT. I would still always be super cautious, like not put anything in terms of personal identifiable information. That said, that's not really what it's for. Like this is for like research material in interacting with it. So it's kind of fun. Hope that helps. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Happy to talk. Happy to run through a use case with you. And yeah, enjoy. See you on down the road.